What do you know about Vladimir Lenin? If you live in the West, probably nothing. And if you do know something, it's probably wrong. Because anti-communist propaganda is some of the Western world's best work. But I love sifting through propaganda. So welcome to the story of Vladimir Lenin. And this is actually part 4 of our Lenin series, so if you missed the other ones, go back and watch it. Where we left off, Lenin and the Bolsheviks had just overthrown the Russian government and established a communist state within Russia. So where we are now, we are going to look at those first few years of Lenin's government and what would be the birth to the future Soviet Union. And there's many revolutionary groups in Russia at the time, but the Bolsheviks have kind of knocked them to the side and made a play for absolute power ruling Russia, with a lot of the governing responsibility falling to the workers' councils or Soviets in the cities. And then the big kind of figurehead guys were all in the political bureau of the Russian Communist Party. And they spend the first year or so systematically removing all the Mensheviks and other groups from their government, until it's just members of the former Bolshevik Party and they have a one-party state that they conveniently completely controlled. And over the next year or so, as the system formed, Lenin was confirmed as the head of the communist state, which basically meant he was appointed by the party to oversee all the councils of workers on behalf of the Russian Communist Party. And this kind of governing role created a bit of an executive branch of the government, or the Sovnarkom. And the chairs of the Sovnarkom would be the official heads of state. And everything is made up of these councils and committees, but Lenin is at the head of the important ones. This is also when we see operations leave St. Petersburg in favor of the Kremlin in Moscow. In 1918 is crazy for a lot of the government, but especially crazy for Lenin. There are 3 major attempts on his life that year. The third was in late August, and it fucked him up pretty good. He was shot twice with blood spurting into his lungs. And if you remember from the last video, his health is already not great, so this event really did ramp up his decline. So keep that in mind as we talk about the forming of the Union. In terms of the government, they start implementing economic reforms that pull from Marxist ideals. The state confiscated all of the church lands to either be redistributed to the peasantry or developed into large-scale state agriculture, as well as all the lands that had previously been held by the Russian nobility. In the cities, major factories and industries were also taken over by the state and run by the Soviet councils. Labor reforms also happened very quickly under this new regime, introducing the limit of an 8-hour workday, which was great compared to England and Co., who was running 12, 14, 15-hour days in the mines. So huge stuff in terms of property and labor, but the country is also in desperate need of social reforms. Because if you remember, shit was incredibly fucking bad before the government fell. So a lot of these groups have had very, very limited rights and liberties for centuries under the former Tsarist government, and culturally, there is a lot going on in this region. So the government separated the church and the state, another harsh contrast compared to the rest of Europe, where the church specifically was dictating a lot of education and other social political areas. And speaking of education, the communist state provided free education to all, and very quickly kicked off a campaign to tackle the country's astronomical illiteracy rate, since most of the people in this area did not have any access to education before communism took hold. And in addition, the banks, transit systems, and trade also came under state governing, as well as they changed the court system to be less reliant on judges, instead using a jury-adjacent system. And if you're like, okay, all of this sounds good, but isn't there a world war going on? Girl, let me tell you, Lenin wants out of this war. He sees it as completely pointless, and a lot of soldiers have deserted their posts during the political unrest, and Russia had given up a lot of territory to the advancing Germans. So the Russian Communist Party and the Central Powers in Germany agree to a treaty that effectively removed Russia from the conflict, but at a hefty price tag. The war had previously been handled so poorly by the Romanovs, it was borderline psychotic. And since a lot of territory had been lost to soldiers just straight up deserting battles during the revolution, the treaty would renounce all Russia's rights to those territories in the Baltic states, Poland, and the Ukraine. Each of those territories faced different fates through the war with the Germans. Russia's definitely being punished here, like they are kicking a wounded dog for sure with this treaty. And the dust has not settled politically at all yet, so it's very much an anything can happen situation in Russia. And now, thanks to that bitch-ass war treaty, Russia has lost some of its most valuable agricultural lands and some of its more densely populated areas. But ultimately, it's a price that needs to be paid for Lenin and the Russian Communist Party because they they need out of World War I so they can focus on rebuilding the steaming pile of hot garbage that is the Russian government. Since right now, Russia is staring down the barrel of a civil war. And to oversimplify it, Lenin and the boys are the Red Army, and the White Army is a bunch of counter-revolutionaries that are unwilling to accept the new leadership. And the White Army had all the usual suspects, including the Orthodox Church and the previous Russian nobility that were mad as fuck at the workers' unions because they were stripped of all their exuberant wealth that they had hoarded for decades amongst the Russian people who struggled and starved beside them. There was also parts of the Russian military that fought for the White Army as well, and some leftist revolutionaries who were mad as fuck at the Bolsheviks for doing this ultimate power play bullshit instead of setting up a democratic communism. So that's who made up the White Army, and if you're thinking about it, like, all of those people are broke, how the fuck would they fight the Bolsheviks in a civil war? The answer is foreign governments. Yup. The USA, Japan, Great Britain, and France are all scared shitless of a workers' revolution popping their industrial revolution wealth bubble. It is within the best interest of their ruling class to make sure a functioning communist system never has the chance to get off the ground and make meaningful changes that would threaten global capitalist systems that they're benefiting from. So the first years of Lenin's government was nothing but issues and bullshit, for sure. The Western capitalist countries are sending money hand over fist to kill the Russian worker revolutionaries, even aiding the new independent state of Poland to wage war on Russia. And Lenin is definitely feeling it. He is quite literally at odds with the entire Western imperial empire. No one is able to meaningfully address the needs of the nation because the evil USA has its star-spangled thong so far up its ass it's flossing its teeth with it. And of course, assassination attempts are fucking crazy for Lenin, and Trotsky and Stalin honestly too. So they're like, bro, fuck this. And Lenin ordered the Emergency Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, or the Cheka, which were established as basically an ultra-powerful secret police force. And they're turned loose to sniff out any traitors or counter-revolutionaries. And with ultimate authority as secret police, we had this fuckhead Felix, and he was rounding people up, arresting and executing whoever he perceived to be an enemy. They also shipped people off to hard labor camps in Siberia. Siberian labor camps and secret police. Close enough. Welcome back, Romanovs. This whole situation is known as the Red Terror, and Lenin is actively trying to distance himself from all that because these are the early days of the new communist state, and the chips are very much still in the air, and we still very much are in the violent fighting stage. It's just painfully ironic that now Lenin has ended up on the top of this power structure, and his government is throwing it back to some of the most horrific tactics of the former czars. They're trying to keep power and build a resilient Russia since it clearly is going to be a target internationally. And it's a very self-serving system because the more the Western imperialists fuck on Russia, the more extreme the Russian government acts to protect itself in response from the threat, which then in turn allows the Western imperialists to be like, see, we gotta stop them, look how extreme they are, and it's on a loop. A loop that is essentially creating a security state in Russia. The civil war is pretty brutal as the government tries to secure itself in Russia. The Romanovs get shot up, and so do a ton of soldiers. Leon Trotsky leads some wild battles to reclaim some major cities. And as 1918 winds down, the Western forces did too. They were unable to destroy the Soviets' Red Army, and they had other political conflicts they needed to manage. And once Russia could take a breath for a second and they weren't defending themselves from all of Europe, they switched it up on them and started playing offense. They're trying to pave their way in the world and get their lick back. So if you want to know how all of this ends up as the Soviet Union, make sure you're following me so you don't miss it, and leave a comment so I can use it in the next video, and I'll meet you right back here, comrade.